Hi, I'm Amber and I'm 9 and I'm at Touchstones in this reading corner and I'm going to read Annie Green Gables. Mrs. Rachel Lynn lived just where the Ovelia main road dipped down into a little hollow. Fringed with elders and ladies, eardrops and traversed by a brook that had a source back in the woods of the old Cuthbert place. It reputed to be an irrigate headlong brook in its earlier course through the woods, with a dark secrets of pool and cascade. But by time it reached Lynn's Hollow, it was quite well conducted. Little stream, not even a brook could run past Mrs. Rachel Lynn's door without due regard decently desorm. It probably was conscious that Mrs. Rachel was sitting at her window, keeping a sharp eye on everything that passed from brooks and children up. And if she noticed anything odd or out of place, she would never rest until she had figured out whys and wheres 3 off. Should I keep going? Okay. There are plenty of people in Avonlea and out of it who can be attended closely to their neighbors' business with a dint of manipulating their own. But Mrs. Rachel Lynn was one of those capable creatures who could imagine their own concerns, and those other folks in the bargain. She was notable as well. Her work was always done and well done. She ran the sewing circle, helped run the Sunday school, and was the strongest prop of the Church Aid Society. And Forgan didn't time for sit for hours in her kitchen window, knitting cotton quilts. She had knitted 16 of them, as of Avonlea housekeepers were wont to tell away voices, and keeping a sharp eye on the main road that crossed the hollow and wound up steep red hill since Avonlea, a little triangle peninsula, just jutting out into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, with water on 2 sides of it, and anybody who went out of it or into it had to pass over the hill road, and so run unseen glanter of Miss Rachel's all-seeing eye.
This is Lauren. She's 3, and she's going to read The Tale of Gemma Puddle Duck.
What a funny sight to see a brood of ducklings with a hen. Listen to the story of Jemima Puddle Duck, who was annoyed because the farmer wife wouldn't not let her hatch her own eggs.
Her sister-in-law, Mrs. Rebecca Puddle Duck, was perfectly willing to give the hatchling to someone else. I have not the patience to sit on a nest for 28 days and have no more than you, Jemima, you would let them go cold. You know you would. I wish to hatch my own eggs. I will hatch them all by myself, quacked Jemima Puddle Duck.
She tried to hide her eggs, but they were always found and carried off. Jemima Puddle Duck became quite desperate. She determined to make a nest right away from the farm.
She set off for this fine spring afternoon along the cart road that leads over the hill. She was wearing a shawl and a poke bonnet.
When she reached the top of the hill, she saw a wood in the distance. She thought that looked like a safe, quiet spot.
Jemima Puddle Duck was not much in the habit of flying. She ran downhill for a few yards, flapping her shawl, and then jumped off into the air. She flew beautifully. When she had gotten a good start, she skimmed along the treetops until she saw an open place in the middle of the woods where the trees and brushwood had been cleared.
Jemima alighted rather heavily and began to waddle about in search of a convenient dry nesting place. She rather fenced a tree stump among some tall foxgloves, but settled upon a stump she was starting to find an elegantly dressed gentleman reading a newspaper. He had black prick ears and sandy-colored whiskers. Quack, quack, question mark, said Jemima Puddle Duck, with her head and a bonnet on one side. Quack. The gentleman raised his eyes above his newspaper and looked curiously at Jemima. "Madame, have you lost your way?" he said. He had a long bushy tail, which was sitting upon the stump was somewhat damp.
I'm Josie, and I am 12, and I'm going to read The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. The Cyclone. Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Candace prairies with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the farmer's wife. Their house was small, for the lumber to build it had to be carried by wagon many miles. There were 4 walls, a floor, and a roof, which made one room. This room contained a rusty-looking cooking stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and the beds. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had a big bed in one corner. Dorothy had a little bed in another. There was no garret at all, and no cellar, except for a small hole dug in the ground, called the Cyclone Cellar, where the family would go in case one of those great whirlwinds arose, mighty enough to crush any building in its path. It was reached by a trap-door in the middle of the floor, which a ladder led down into the small dark hole. When Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, she could see nothing but the great gray prairie on every side. Not a tree or a house broke the broad sweep of the flat country that reached the edge of the sky in all directions. The sun had baked the plowed land into a gray mass with little cracks running through it. Even the grass was not green, for the sun had burned the tops of the long blades, but until they were the same color to be seen everywhere. Once the old house had been painted, but the sun-blistered paint and rain washed it away, and now the house was dull and gray as everything else. When Aunt Em came there to live, she was a pretty young wife. The sun and wind had changed her too, and had taken the sparkle from her eyes and left them a sober gray. They were taken to red from her cheeks and lips, and now were also gray. She was thin and gaunt, and never smiled now. When Dorothy, who was an orphan, came to her, Aunt Em had been so startled by the child's laughter, she would scream and press her hand upon her heart whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears. And she still looked at the little girl with wonder and finding how she could laugh. Uncle Henry never laughed. He worked hard from morning to night. He did not know what joy was. He was gray also, from his long beard to his rough boots. He looked stern and solemn, and he rarely spoke. It was Toto that made Dorothy laugh and saved her from growing as gray as her surroundings. Toto was not gray. He was a black little dog with silky hair and small black eyes, with that twinkled merry on each side of his funny wee nose. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him and loved him dearly. Today, however, they were not playing. Uncle Henry sat upon the doorstep and looked anxiously at the sky. It was even grayer than usual. Dorothy stood in the door with Toto in her arms and looked at the sky too. Aunt Em was washing the dishes. From far north they heard a loud wail of the wind, and Uncle Henry and Dorothy could see where the long grass bowed in waves across the coming storm. There now came a sharp whistling in the air from the south, and they turned their eyes that way and saw ripples of the grass coming from the direction as well. Suddenly, Uncle Henry stood up. "There's a cyclone coming, Em." He called to his wife. "I'll go look after the stock." Then he ran towards the sheds where the cows and horses were kept.